Let's continue this focus on the challenges facing the higher education sector. And Rhodes University Professor Paul Maylam says questions need to be asked about the viability of taking on large numbers of students, many of whom fail to complete their studies. And this issue now that we're talking about, NSFAS announcing a cap on student accommodation fees, which Maylam says leaves universities with shortfalls running into the millions. Professor Paul Maylam joins us now for more. Professor Maylam, good morning, and thank you very much for your time. There are a lot of areas, I've mentioned too, that trouble you about what goes on at universities. But let's start with their ability to function well under this marquee of what you term government's massification policy of swelling student numbers.
Yes, I think what's happened over the last number of years, number of decades, is that the state has wanted universities to take in more and more students, and understandably so. But at the same time, it has been cutting the subsidy paid to universities. To take Rhodes University, for instance, about 40 years ago, 80% of its income came from government subsidy. That has now, I think, gone below 50%. What that means is student fees have to rise, and that puts a great deal of pressure on students. It also puts a great deal of pressure on university academics, who all have to do much more with less. They have to teach larger classes and so on. So I think the system is not working as it should and needs to be seriously reviewed.
Perhaps if we can tease out that theme of the impact to the universities, whether it be the pressure, as you say, on lecturers, especially the junior lecturers who are dealing with the undergrad students, or the ability for the university to do important research, that kind of distinguishes itself above other institutions.
Yes, I think there is definitely a problem there. Again, 40, 50 years ago, senior academics were under less pressure to produce a lot of research and publications and could involve themselves much more in undergraduate teaching. I personally, myself, benefited from that kind of teaching. Now, I think the rewards and the prestige for academics come from research, postgraduate supervision and publication. And they spend much less time on undergraduate teaching, which gets palmed off onto junior lecturers or contract lecturers. And that may well be part of the problem with this high failure rate, or the fact that perhaps only 50% or so of students who register at first year actually complete their degrees. So I think that is a problem which, again, needs to be looked at.
And I want to come to that directly. So last I checked, 26 universities across the country, accommodating about 1 million students. We know that UNISA takes the bulk of that, around, I think, 400,000 just as an institution alone. But these are the lucky cohort who make it past so many challenges. Every year we have the heartbreaking applications, a huge cohort or community of qualifying students, the rejections, the financial stress, the expectations, and as you've just mentioned, that disturbing stat of those who actually successfully cross all of those hurdles, about half of them drop out in the first year. Why is that rate so high? Why are they dropping out so fast?
I think one of the problems is that perhaps people think, parents and students themselves, think that entry into university, the completion of a degree, is a road to material comfort. And I don't think that is necessarily the case. I think a lot of students are actually not cut out for university study. And what should be happening is there should be much more emphasis on vocational training. There are a lot of matriculants who have, I'm sure, a number of skills, but the skills may not be those required for university study. And I think it's important perhaps to place less emphasis on university entry. And I think it was a great pity that about 20 or so years ago, a lot of the old technikons, which were technically oriented, converted themselves into universities. And I think that was a big mistake, and we need to somehow reverse that and encourage more matriculants to go into vocational training.
That work that you're talking about around reorienting the way that we view education, higher education, going into a professional career, a white-collar career, that time, it would seem, not only in the South African economy, but globally, has to change. As you say, it's not everybody's path, and if we have these high rates of dropouts, that effectively, in some ways, constitutes a massive waste. In fact, let's just quickly tease that out. What is the impact, and you mentioned it in your keynote address, the impact of dropouts on both, on society and just in general?
I think that the impact must be huge. There's, first of all, a massive financial impact. People, parents, or whoever, have invested in a student's education, and that they may last for 2 or 3 years, even at the university, and not complete a degree. There's been a huge investment. And then investment also by taxpayers, because, as I say, taxpayers are contributing towards the subsidy. And then there's the morale. Students come out of university with perhaps a sense of failure, which is very bad psychologically for them. So this much less emphasis, as I say, needs to be placed on, I think, university education in the higher education sector. It's also a pity that the teachers' training colleges closed down, where there's going to be a drastic shortage of teachers, I think, in the next few years, so I'm told. So there needs to be a rethink on higher education policy at the highest level of government, from the Ministry of Higher Education down through various bodies like the Council for Higher Education and others.
Yeah, and I think it's really worthwhile to maybe have a bigger conversation around this, bringing in those players. And as you say, and as you're speaking, Paul, a lot of what you're saying is really common sense. Establish at school leaving, at that point, whether a child has the aptitude, the inclination, the joy of what academia in a higher, learning, institute for higher learning, like a university would give them, and others who might not enjoy that as much, who prefer going into the technical arena, to rather consider the TVET colleges. Again, there's a question there, because what is the quality of a number of the TVET colleges around the country? Can they live up to the promise of endowing those students with the capabilities that they need and that they've promised? It certainly needs to start at school leaving level. And I guess parents as well have to change the way they traditionally think about education. Would you concur with that view?
Yes, absolutely, indeed. I think one also needs to go beyond, below the tertiary level and look at the schooling system and even early childhood development. I was hearing on the radio a couple of days ago an expert in early childhood development saying that only about 2% of the education budget goes towards that. And we've clearly got a problem in the country if, as it is said, 80% of grade 4 learners can't read for meaning. Now, I think this has been a strength here at Rhodes in Makanda, where the university is devoting a lot more attention to school education in this town, very successfully, led by the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Mabazela. And I'm told that the proportion of grade 4 learners in this town who can't read for meaning is now below 20%, way below the national average. So I think if universities can collaborate with local schools, that would also be an advance.
This is Professor Paul Maylam. Thank you very much for popping by. We appreciate it so much.